Hello everybody. I decided to do a faction overview of every single faction within this mod, and I intend to do that as well for every single mod I play pretty much for Medieval 2 Total War, because this is my all-time favorite Total War game, in all honesty. I grew up playing this one. It's the first Total War game I ever played. I did end up getting Rome Total War. I think actually before I got this one. Actually, no, I got it after, but I never actually got to play it because, unfortunately, I got scammed out of a video game because when I took it home, it didn't actually work. Although it was incredibly cheap. Well, most of the disc worked. It was just the first one that was just unreadable, unfortunately. And even better was I actually ended up throwing out my original disc by accident when I did buy the game again later on down the road. So I ended up having to repurchase Rome Total War for a third time. So there's that story. But anyway, I wanted to do a faction overview of Gondor, my favorite faction in this mod to play. I haven't really messed around with too many of the other factions. I've essentially no desire to play any of the evil factions, I'll be honest with you now. I don't even know if I want to do a review on those ones. Maybe further on down the road because I just have no experience with them. The only factions I've really messed around with are Gondor and the Dwarves. I have messed around with the High Elves as well. And I believe I played, I played the Free Peoples of Eriador? However you say it. I did try Rohan last time. Rohan is rather easy to win though. It's not that hard. But Gondor is a very interesting faction because of its, situation compared to a lot of the other factions, and that's why I find it the most enjoyable to play, more so than anything else, especially because of its location. As you can see here, that is your starting region, and right next to you, you have Mordor, the great looming evil in the east that you have to contend with, which is incredibly powerful, and they get stronger as the game progresses, of course, depending on how you play. But let's start it off and see what we have to work with here. We have Swan Knights also as our best unit, supposedly. And our weaknesses are slow recruitment and costly units, which is very true, but wait till you see how much the dwarves cost, or even the elves cost for their troops. It's far, far more terrifying than you can imagine. But they have some really good troops, in all honesty. So let's just skip that and look at our current situation and what the best way to play the game is. And I'm going to, go over the opening tips I can give, because I don't want to do too lengthy of a video on this, because I'm not an expert on it. And I've noticed there's quite a few people that have done Let's Plays specifically as Gondor, and they give their own insights as to how they like playing. Everyone has their own different playstyle. Of course, though, I don't think I've ever seen anybody do this specific version of the mod, which is 1.7, I believe. I would do Divide and Conquer faction reviews, but there's already a guy that's essentially, one of the original mod creators who's done that. So this doesn't really matter. I mean, usually I just tick everything, except for that. I hate that script. I like that one. I like that one. Yes. I do actually enjoy having immortal heroes, I'm not going to lie. I know that's kind of like a noob strat and it's not necessarily lore friendly, but I mean, based off the movies, essentially all of the heroes to begin with are immortal. I mean, the only one that actually dies is Boromir, obviously. But I mean, look who was playing him. I mean, that's expected to happen. It doesn't matter though, I'm not actually going to play a full campaign. Obviously, I'm just going to go over the basics. You have all these scripts that are nice. Yes, I always do Corsair Invasion. I always decline that one. Yes, Immortal Nazgul. Yes. Alright. So, as you can see, we don't have very many troops on the border, really. Well, actually, we do have quite a sizable force, in all honesty. I mean, more than enough to kick these guys out of here. Especially considering their units are far worse than what Gondor has.
Protect the blood of Numenor.
This right here, I highly recommend you don't give it up. In my early playthroughs of the game, when I was younger and rather noobish, I used to always give up this position, But if you keep it and you fortify it, it is almost impenetrable, and Mordor will just throw wave after wave at it, and they will just get completely annihilated. Because similar to Minas Tirith, it's essentially on a giant hill. Minas Tirith obviously is in the mountain, and you can just pull all of your troops all the way up to the very top of the actual city, and from there you can essentially win every battle, because by the time that they break through the gates and work their way all the way through the city to the top, already half of the battle timer is over if you play it like that. And even better, their forces are almost completely exhausted by the time they get to the top, so they're essentially useless in combat, ineffective. Meanwhile, your troops are just fresh still and able to essentially just mop them up easily. So Minas Tirith on the defense, insanely OP if you do it like that and you just pull all your troops to the very top, which is similar to this point here. It's very strong. I highly recommend you don't give up this position. Of course, it depends on your play style. Me personally, I enjoy playing it more realistically to the story, you know, not necessarily just completely swamping Mordor at the start. A lot of YouTubers I've noticed, or people that have played this mod, they tend to just grab as many troops as they can, and they just immediately try and flood into Mordor and take them out before they're able to build up full strength. Because the longer the game goes on, the more wealth the Mordor accumulates, obviously. And I think that there's an actual script in the game. I could be wrong. I might be thinking about Divide and Conquer, but I believe it's in this one too, where they actually gain money as the game progresses at an increasing rate, essentially. Obviously, that's not just because of development from their cities, but I mean, they actually have a script that adds, I think, extra money every turn, regardless of what they've built. So it gets to a point where Mordor is just able to essentially completely pump out more troops than you can, because their infrastructure is just essentially, you know, continuously expanding, even if they don't invest into it. Another situation here, as you can see, we got all rebel territories along the border, yada yada yada. I don't recommend taking East Osgiliath. There's not really much point in doing so, because if you do so, you're just going to get most of the troops that come out of here swamping it, and it's not a very defensible location to begin with. Because if you see, if you hold the western side, they have to cross a bridge. Unlike you holding this side, where they just essentially come from inland and can just completely swarm you, and you have almost no chance to funnel them into a bottleneck. And you're just better off holding this point. Kierandros, that is a very debatable thing there. Generally speaking, I don't really care for it much early game, because I just don't have the troops to hold it, but I do recommend you lock it down at some point or another, because other way, Mordor is going to get tired of attacking this spot, and they're going to try and push through eventually. Especially when they call, you know, they're the equivalent of a jihad on your capital, inevitably. So not really much to worry about up here. Just hold this location, keep Faramir and his men here, and you should be able to hold off essentially endless stacks. I do recommend pulling some troops out, for example. Some basic militia and stuff is all you really need, and upgrading this position as well to get some better archers as well. Obviously, you don't have a huge population here, so it's not going to have, you know, rapid development or anything like that. I wouldn't expect that. This is just more so than anything else a fort. Just consider it like that. So yeah, don't push past this point if you're like me, and you just want to mess around on the hardest difficulty, and you don't want to completely curb stop them. And on top of that too, I mean, if you're not a super competent player, I don't recommend trying to push Mordor anyway. I mean, I remember I tried to mimic a lot of the people I watched on YouTube, and I always got up to around the Black Gate and up to this point early on in the game. But usually, like, my economy becomes, you know, stagnant or something along those lines when I try and go for a full-on push. And Mordor is just able to essentially completely curb stomp me. I mean, you can hold, you know, I think it's Minas Ithil. I might be wrong. I believe that's what it's called. Oh, sorry, Minas Morgul. My bad. Wasn't that the previous name? I'm not very good with the lore, I'll be honest with you. I don't know as much as I should, considering the fact I used to completely devour the movies on a daily basis. The books not so much. I never really cared that much for the books. Don't get me wrong, the books are good, but I don't know. Books have never been a huge thing of mine. But anyway, yeah, I mean, you can hold this position too, and you can just bottleneck them here, because essentially they have to go through one gate, in order to get inside, and it is a very good bottleneck. The only problem is that usually then they just come through here once again, and then you have to defend this point, and then you have to defend that point as well. And then usually later on in the game as well, Harad comes up from the south, and then they begin harassing you here, and then you have to worry about this place as well. And it just, holding it, it just opens up more spots for them to attack you and further strains your forces, and it's just really not worth it. Unless you intend to be an aggressive player and you want to play like that, sure, go ahead and try and, you know, wipe them out as quickly as you can, but more so than not, I mean, if you lose one battle, it's game over, and they'll just come and completely stomp everything else that you have, you know, remaining. Here, what do you do about this location particularly? Should you expand outward? I don't recommend it. Usually what I do is, I build boats, and you see these little crossings here. If you put a boat within the crossing, enemy troops are actually unable to cross that point. So normally what I do is I keep a very minimalist force along the border here, because this is where you're also going to be attacked from the south later on as Harad starts pushing up into the north. So you put a bunch of ships here, I think 3 around here, maybe 2 around there, and that essentially completely prevents any sort of incursions from the south into these areas. Depending though on what you do, I do have the script on, for example, you know, where there are random Corsair invasions that take place, so even though I might be well protected down here, Corsairs just randomly spawn along the coast at random times, and they can, you know, spawn back here, over around there, over here, even here. So all in all, like, trying to defend these regions is very difficult. I recommend only trying to defend the ones that you actually legitimately care about, if you intend to use that script, because I'm not going to deny the fact that that script is very annoying to deal with, because usually your forces are already tied up heavily in this area, because they're, you know, you got tons of orcs trying to continuously push you. But then when you throw on just random armies spawning and then sacking your cities in the south at a continuous basis, I mean, it's a lot to deal with. Now, going further west, you have a city here I recommend you take. There's another one, I believe, around there, and then there's another one around here. Usually that's about as far as I push, and I hold on to these back regions, and that's about it. But you can push further up into here, because you have Dunland here, and you have Isengard here. And believe it or not, Rohan does a very terrible job of trying to suppress these issues, especially Dunland. Sooner or later, they're going to come in, and they're going to start hitting you from the back. So essentially, you're getting hit on 3 different fronts, and that's where Gondor's main weakness is its size and its lack of actual reliable allies, because Rohan has kind of been wedged over to this side, so that leaves this entire area completely exposed that you have to worry about. So I recommend you have maybe a small force defending around here if you're going to capture these back regions. But I mean, regardless, you should do that anyway. And another thing you should keep in mind as well, I highly recommend you do, is hire as many goddamn mercenaries as you can when you get the chance, because as you can see here, they have 0 upkeep. So they're not going to put a huge financial strain on you once you buy them. They're just yours, which is nice. Of course, they aren't, you know, something that spawns every turn, but just keep an eye out for them, because they do spawn periodically, and at the start of the game, usually I tend to buy a bunch of them, just because I don't like having to waste money on troops unnecessarily. But usually I use them as reserves more than anything else. I don't actually put them on the front line unless I absolutely have to, because I understand that they're free, and I don't want to use them up unless, you know, I absolutely have to, because they're not something you can easily replace. But generally speaking, I would recommend grabbing most of your forces allocated within these regions, pulling them over here, maybe grabbing a bunch from down here, these few cities down here, getting a ship, and I recommend taking that ship, setting sail down here, and start raiding Harad's territories. Just start raiding them. Do the exact same thing they intend to do to you, essentially with you know, their Corsair invasions. Just get your bunch of troops, put them on a ship, start capturing cities, attacking them, retreating, send your spies down here, scout out the area. That way they were never able to completely consolidate their forces and start pushing you, because if they do, it'll put even more pressure on you than anything else, because you're better off just taking an army rather than trying to hold an army down here and sending them on a ship and just beginning to harass their coastline cities, because you can get also quite a bit of money from doing so. And I highly recommend, when you do take a city, you go and you right click on a specific building and you completely scrap it, because not only are you getting money from doing so, you're also destroying their capacity to actually build up a military force to continuously harass you. So that's quite good. I've had great experience doing that. And you know, my attempts to thwart any sort of advances that they've made. Back here, similar kind of situation. I mean, like, if you do it enough times, usually what I like to do is, usually I take a couple of generals here. I think usually these two guys.
Awaiting your command.
And I buy some more mercenaries, as you can see, that you can get off the bat. I take them. I lock down these territories. Keep in mind, there are rebels in these areas that will ambush you if you do not know their specific locations. So just be wary of that as you're trying to travel across over there, because there's quite a few of them. There's one around there, and I believe there's one right around this city as well. And I think that's about it. But if they ambush you, they could essentially decimate your entire force. But generally speaking, I take, yeah, these troops allocated in this region, I use them to capture the back half and then kind of defend it. I take a lot of the troops allocated down here in the south, throw them on a ship, begin harassing the Haradrim in the south, and then I grab my remaining troops, usually around here, and then I throw them over to defend Osgiliath and, you know, Kara-Andros and Henneth Anun. Minas Tirith, you don't have to worry about as much until, you know, an actual jihad is called on you. If you do that, you know, you keep your ships here and stuff, you should be essentially impervious to any sort of advances and stuff. As long as you're able to win your battles and hold, you know, your territories and keep them decently reinforced, you'll be fine. That's all you really need to worry about. Of course, there is up here that I believe enemy troops can cross through, which is around that point, but that's quite a ways to go for them, and they will, believe it or not, come all the way through there eventually at some point or another, if you are able to successfully hold all of these choke points. And that's what I find the most enjoyment in doing when playing this game more than anything else, is just trying to hold off endless waves and build up my military power to actually pose a serious threat against Mordor more than anything else. So we're going to look at an example of an actual campaign that I did where I got up to, I think, around, was it turn 100? This is generally where I stop. So you can see just how efficient following that playstyle can be. This is an example that it actually works, and it's an, you know, viable strategy. Ooh, what is this? Oh, we'll just auto-resolve that. Doesn't matter.
We have vanquished the enemy.
As you can see here,
The realm is expanded.
Imrahil is actually originally stationed. I did turn off the Fog of War when I was playing this. Although I did just turn it off because I intended to do this and I wanted to actually do it around the 100 point, just specifically to advertise this. But to give you a better sense of exactly what the situation will be, because I wanted to do this for a while, but I'm just actually doing it now. But as you can see,
I'm gonna stick you.
Mordor heavily allocates a lot of its troops to this area. They have another army there. They also have armies that, you know, push up into around this area because they have territories going up into this, you know, forest, Mirkwood and all of that. But yeah, not necessarily a super military power from what you can see here, but the thing with Mordor is the more you push them, the stronger they become, because they just continuously throw more and more meat stacks at you, because they have more, you know, money available after their units get completely wiped out. As you can see, I have a decent-sized army here. Essentially, though, these guys are all free of charge. This is just, once again, my free units. I just spam these guys out, and I keep them essentially on the coastline just to defend. I have a couple of ships here guarding the coast as well to stop this army from moving up north. Another ship there, another ship in reserve as well, if I want to ferry troops up and down along here quickly. I did end up capturing this region, and I've launched, you know, several incursions into this territory. So much so that they've actually kept, as you can see, I even kept my spa here. more proof that I wasn't just, you know, turning off the map the entire time, or the fog of war, so I could see what was happening. But anyway, you know, constantly attacking Umbar, and these cities here, and there, and continuously raiding them. That way that they actually keep a lot of their troops in the south, because as you can see, they have two armies essentially just sitting there idly. They have more here, and more there, and more there. But regardless of me, when you do attack a city like that, the AI tends to immediately, rather than push you, they tend to retreat to try and defend their cities. That's something you can exploit, once again, by harassing these. I did stop harassing them, though, as you can see, because I no longer have an army in the region. This is my only sizable force, and it only consists of, you know, levy swordsmen. And the reason for that is because I took my remaining forces that I had on the ship. Do I have a ship here? Maybe not. Oh yeah, I was recuperating my forces. I did build up a navy just specifically to kill off the Corsair ships if I spotted them before they reached the shore. Because that way you can just stop those random spawning armies from hitting you immediately, which is nice. But yeah, I took my troops, my elite generals and stuff that I had harassing here, and I was using, you know, free troops as well, as you can see, because these are the men I was using to harass down south. They're not necessarily veteran, but I highly recommend, if you do go for that playstyle, is you use your generals, because your generals essentially are invincible for the most part. Most troops that Mordor has won't be able to deal with them. They're also almost always going to be cavalry, apart from Faramir. And you can essentially just continuously raid and harass their cities down here, and they can't do anything to stop it. And the best part is once again, is that your generals, if the general himself is killed, obviously the entire unit will disband, right? All of his bodyguard will just vanish. But if he is not actually killed, next turn, all of those troops that died within his bodyguard are completely replenished. So this is a much more effective strat than trying to maintain long, you know, logistical lines of supply and, you know, getting reinforcements to the front line. You're better off just using your generals in one giant army to harass and, you know, push into enemy territory, because you can also accomplish far more with them, especially because they're, you know, they're all mounted cavalry, so they can go even further than, you know, your standard infantry can on the map. So it's perfect for that, and I even use them to go up north and begin harassing Dunland and Isengard to help my ally. I even actually ended up taking Isengard specifically, just because Rohan was struggling over there, just to get them out of the way. Dunland, though, as you can see, quite a serious threat. They are fighting another faction, obviously, Eriador. But regardless, I don't see very often in any games I've played where they actually are specifically weak. And they're usually able to push in whatever direction they feel like. And most of the time it's down here. But the only reason I pushed up north is because they started pushing down south, and I realized I had to go deal with them. That's why all my forces are in this area, because I wanted to get them out of the way and secure my back door. So that way, not only do I secure myself, you know, from being attacked in this front, that means also I have Rohan, which will start putting pressure on Mordor, because they will no longer have to defend these regions from any sort of attacks, and they can fully concentrate their forces on, you know, the eastern front. But overall, it's a very viable strategy if you enjoy playing it very carefully. And I mean, as you can see, like, once again, this is just the composition of my troops that I generally speaking have. It's just the levy troops. It's not really OP men that you need to hold against the orcs, because they're not very good to begin with. But I do recommend you keep at least one of these units in one of your armies defending, especially Osgiliath, because if the Mumakil do come up, the giant elephants from Harad, and they do attempt to take the city, they will wreak havoc on your forces, because not very many troops that you have will stop them. And these are one of the very few units that can completely wipe them in a matter of seconds. And as you can see, yeah, just more cheap units, you know. The bulk of my army is actually not professional troops, it's just militia. Even here, I just have a very basic army defending, although it's a little bit more heavily equipped than the rest of my forces, simply because of the fact that I don't have a general stationed here. but they haven't actually attacked this city once, because most of their forces have been concentrated on here. As you can see, I also have another militia force here, but they are extremely veteran and extremely elite, because Mordor has just been throwing wave after wave. But that would be my tip for how to play Gondor. My endless rant, I guess I shall now conclude. Because there's not really much else left to say. I mean, if you do intend to be an aggressive player, I mean, obviously, push up to here, take Minas Morgul, try and hold on to it as best as you can. I would recommend holding, you know, these territories still, because then that way you don't get hit from the top. But once again, you will be hit from the south sooner or later. And, you know, if you're going to do it, I mean, you got to go all out. You got to just pour everything into Mordor. It is a doable strategy. It's just, I don't find it as enjoyable to just completely curb stomp the AI as quickly as I possibly can. I just have more fun playing it more defensive and slowly building up my strength and forces. I just have a much more enjoyable experience. I guess I should quickly jump into the economy side of things. I mean, there's really not much to be said about that. I mean, I'm sure most of you already know what you're doing on that, but make sure you're getting roads, make sure you're getting farms, because, you know, if you have your farms all maxed out, the faster your cities will develop, and then therefore you'll have more money at your disposal. And all of that stuff, because your populations will be growing and your cities will be growing, and then you'll have, you know, further upgrades for your cities, which, you know, generally leads to more incentives to make money within those cities, or I guess possibilities, whatever you want to say. But yeah, that would be my pro tips. Not necessarily pro, though. I don't really consider myself a pro at the game at all, but that's what I would recommend doing while playing as Gondor. But thank you for watching, and I wish you all the best of luck if you attempt playing this mod and following a similar path, because I remember when I was younger, once again, I had no idea how to play Gondor. I had tried the rush strategy, I had failed numerous times, I tried playing defensively, and I just could not stop the endless incursions coming in. I could not prevent the endless tides of evil just pouring into my country and wiping me out. And generally speaking, if you lose Minas Tirith, or, you know, even Western Osgiliath, or Henneth Noon and Cair Andros, if you lose this general area, the game is essentially over for you, because Mordor will just come pouring in, and most of your cities, as you can see, are going to be underdeveloped. The only other real city that you can use is Dol Amroth to get decent troops out of, and even still, these troops aren't necessarily cheap or easy to produce en masse. So if they get to that point and they essentially lock down this region, or sorry, they take these areas from you, you're done for. Which is why I would recommend that you play the game with a timer on. If you don't have a battle timer on, you're going to have a very, very hard time trying to stay alive. Kind of cheating, I suppose. I suppose it is cheating in a lot of ways to have a battle timer on, because you can essentially just wait out any sort of, you know, enemy attacks onto your land, but realistically the enemy would get exhausted, their morale would, you know, break. Of course, I mean, you're fighting orcs and stuff like that, but even still, I mean, they're going to need food, they're going to need resources. Of course the defenders would, and I mean, technically your stores and supplies would run out probably faster than theirs would, because I mean, they're sieging you, right? You're not going to be able to gather much resources and materials if your city is literally surrounded and the only farmland is outside of it. So yeah, but that's what I would recommend doing. I'm going to shut up now. Bye.